one big problem that people have, and they think Vatican II is to blame for it, and that's the new Mass, the Novus Ordo. Some people will say that the Novus Ordo, for our listeners, as opposed to the Latin Mass, for non-Catholics, we have a lot of Protestants who watch our channel. There's a difference between the Latin Mass, which is, a very ancient rite within the church, an ancient Mass. But, and then with Vatican II, more of the modern languages came about. And here we have the English Masses. So a lot of people will say that the new Mass is invalid. And they'll even go to the extreme to say that people cannot, in good conscience, attend a Mass that is not in Latin. So what would you say about that? Is the Novus Ordo a valid Mass, and are Catholics able to attend?
If the Novus Ordo is not a valid Mass, and if one is not able to attend them, on principle, not because there maybe is some kind of subjective issue at a particular parish, but as a matter of principle, one is not able to attend it and its Masses are invalid, then the church has defected from the faith and one should no longer consider Catholicism. If that were true, you've sold the farm. Why still be Catholic at this point? At that point, Eastern Orthodoxy might need to be given a second look, or Oriental Orthodoxy or something else. I don't know, maybe Protestantism. I clearly don't take that position, right? I don't believe that the Novus Ordo is invalid. Let me first say this, just to give a little perspective. If you were to say, Michael, would you rather attend a traditional Latin Mass, even though I don't like that phrase, I'll still use the term, because that's what most people are going to be familiar with. Would you rather attend a traditional Latin Mass, or would you rather attend the average Novus Ordo? I would say I'd rather attend the traditional Latin Mass, right? Than the average Novus Ordo. Now, if somebody were to say, well, but if you had a Novus Ordo that is done properly, right, the ideal form of it versus the ideal traditional Latin Mass, which would you rather attend? I would say actually the Novus Ordo, the ideal version of it, not the one that you will encounter at regular parishes where it's not being done properly. And the reason why is there have been a lot of things that have happened in the liturgical history of the Roman tradition that the Second Vatican Council rightly reversed. There were a lot of innovations that were brought about in the Roman Rite that you can see, especially in the Tridentine liturgy, that though might be good, they're not evil, they're not harmful. I don't think they're best. I don't think they're ideal, and they're definitely innovations and not the previous form of how things were generally done in the Roman Rite, such as communion under one kind, and less of an actual participation on part of the congregation. Those are just, so of course the restoration of the chalice, more participation on part of the faithful when it comes to chanting and things like that. I think that
extra readings.
Extra readings. I think those are good things. But of course, along with those came some bad things after the fact, a lot of abuses. Mm-hmm. And some that aren't actual abuses, but I don't think that there are ideals, such as versus populum. I don't prefer that. I don't think it's evil, but I also don't think that it is the ideal. I think the priest should be facing liturgical east at Orientum. So there's a give and take there. There were some good things that came out of the post-conciliar liturgical reform, and then there were some things that didn't work out so well and I think need to be reversed. But that being said, personally, I prefer more the Byzantine liturgies. But if you were to ask me in the Roman Rite, that's kind of what I would say there. So having said all of that, I would say both are valid. I might prefer the traditional Latin Mass compared to the average Novus Ordo, but I will say an ideal Novus Ordo versus an ideal traditional Latin Mass. I actually think the ideal Novus Ordo is better and is more historically proper to the Roman Rite. The problem is most people don't see that. That's what most people don't experience. So when they hear Novus Ordo in their mind, they're thinking something else.
So wait. So the Tridentine Mass is not the Mass of all time?
It's not. And really, when you study the history of the Roman Rite, you'll end up becoming a little bit more comfortable with the post-conciliar liturgical reforms, just because you'll see how many things were changed from the 900s on in the Roman Rite. So if we're going to criticize the post-conciliar liturgical reform just in general, right? Not making just a particular criticism here and there, but just the whole thing, and just saying we need to press the reset button, go back to the traditional Latin Mass, because that's the way things should be done, and there's all these innovations afterwards. If we're really going to use that approach, we should apply it consistently and say, well, we really shouldn't accept the Roman Rite at all, because the Roman Rite has been engaging in all kinds of liturgical innovations for a very long time, for better or worse. And again, I'm not saying these liturgical innovations on part of the Roman liturgy are evil. No, whenever, for example, the chalice was withheld from the laity, it was for a good reason at the time. Right. So I don't think that that's something evil, and I don't think that people are receiving less grace. But is this the ideal expression liturgically? No, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
Same thing for withholding communion from infants whenever the Roman tradition stopped doing that. It's not something evil. It's not just entirely taking people away from God or something. It's not just excluding infants from the kingdom of heaven or anything. But it's definitely not the ideal liturgically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think this goes back to what we were saying before, where people take one thing and they just attack Vatican II, when they'll say, oh, well, look at the Novus Ordo, look at all the abuses, look at all the bad things. Therefore, Vatican II is bad. And they keep making this association that does not hold up. Because if anyone's read the documents of Vatican II did not call for what we have today, the way we have it today. It does not hold up. I mean, there were so many more things that Vatican II called for, and even the things that could be changed, like the primary instrument being the organ or chants and things like that. We're supposed to have permission from the bishop, not just have every priest everywhere willy-nilly change to whatever he felt and fancied in himself. And I think that's an important note that people don't realize. I go to a church sometimes 2 towns over, and the mass is a Novus Ordo mass, but it's half in English and it's half in Latin. The priest faces the tabernacle, and even when he turns around to face the audience, he never looks at us. He looks at the floor or he looks at the sky, because he realizes that it's not a show. It's a prayer from beginning to end. And it is the most reverent mass. Almost everyone receives kneeling or on the tongue. There are chants that all the ordinaries are in Latin. And so this is what Vatican II, more, akin to what Vatican II wanted. They didn't just want a wholesale extinguishing of what we had before. And it's such a beautiful mass. And I would agree with you. While I love the Latin mass and it is beautiful, I actually prefer the mass to be done this way, because not only can I participate and enter more deeply, it still has the transcendence and the reverence which the Latin mass brings and is known for and is beautiful.
And that was another one, which, though I prefer kneeling and on the tongue in the Roman Rite, I don't think the way communion on the hand is done today in the Roman Rite is done very well. So I think it's better to just kneel and do on the tongue. Having said that, though, we still have to recognize that communion on the tongue is an innovation. The general way that East and West did communion in the first millennium was on the hand, though it was done extremely reverently, not the way it was done today.
Right.
So there have been some innovations here. So again, if we're going to criticize the post-conciliar liturgical reforms and say, oh, it's just an innovation, some of them actually aren't innovations. It's kind of a restoration. But even then, if we're going to say, well, it's an innovation, such as versus populum, okay, but what about all the innovations in the Tridentine Mass? What do we do about those? Now, some are going to accuse me of antiquarianism, and I'm not saying, well, just because something is ancient, that makes it best. No. That's why I said I think it's actually better to go with the innovation of communion on the tongue rather than communion on the hand, the communion on the hand is the ancient way, but I would say in the Roman Rite, it'd be better to do it on the tongue than to be haphazard in the way it's done today and careless in the way it's done today. So I'm not promoting antiquarianism. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's best.
Right. And I think that's a great point and a great distinction. I actually made a video on in the tongue or in the hand, and I talked about the ancient tradition, being first in the hand, and got flamed for it, of course, by a lot of people. But people say, oh, there's only two circumstances. And they, most places say there's only two people, but I named at least, if I remember correctly, six.
Yeah, there's way more than there's way more than two. Yeah. And the problem is some people just kind of go with some of the quotes that you find online.
Exactly.
If you dig deeper than that and really go to some of the primary sources, you'll find that there's way more than just two, as you just noted, six.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even more than that.
Right.
It was clearly the case until it was right around 898 where we start seeing in the West communion on the tongue. Prior to that, it was in the hand.
And I just want for our viewers, before everyone freaks out and has a kind of a tizzy fit here, we're not advocating communion in the hand, just in case people want to misinterpret what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
We both prefer communion on the tongue and kneeling. That is the reverent way to do it.
When I go to the Roman Rite, I receive on the tongue. So
absolutely.
That's me personally. But again, if we're going to be consistent and criticize liturgical innovations post-conciliar, why don't we do the same thing about the innovations that have been happening for the last 1,000 years? Because the Eastern Orthodox are just going to turn back around and say, you're not going far back enough. You need to criticize the last 1,000 years of